Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 107, Avoiding a Sleep Divorce. Let's stay together. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast, welcome. If you're a veteran of the podcast, welcome back. We're glad to have you as part of the family. It's been a busy week. Didn't travel anywhere particularly interesting, so I got to stay at home and do some household projects and get caught up on paperwork and things of that nature. Always great. Really enjoyed the 4th. Hope you had a really great holiday with your family and loved ones. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so. Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Threads, Bluesky. We have a YouTube page where we upload all of our content. I've written 2 books, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep is Broken and How to Fix It, as well as The Rested Child, Why Your Tired, Wired, or Irritable Child May Have a Sleep Disorder and How to Help. I thought I would feature 2 reviews of my books that came in relatively recently. I appreciate reviews of my books. I really appreciate subscriptions and reviews to the podcast. Diane wrote, honestly, I thought my body had lost the ability to regulate sleep. I've only had the book for 2 days, had the best sleep last night I can remember. You have to keep an open mind. Even if you can't, the book is very funny. And Melanie wrote, this book has had such a profound impact on me that I own both the audio and physical book. Both have great delivery with compassion and humor. If you know you've had poor sleep for most of your life, sleep books can be scary because we know sleep is important, but it can feel out of our control whether we get that quality sleep or not. I thought I knew everything about sleep health by knowing the basics of sleep hygiene, but this book reveals that there is so much more to sleep than that. It revealed things that were in my control to change that benefit sleep. Maybe I'd heard similar sleep advice or information, but before it fell on deaf ears, something about how this book is delivered really helped me engage and absorb the information this time. I really appreciate that, Melanie and Diane, for you to take the time, for you to buy my book. I'm frankly always surprised that people buy it. Like, it just doesn't seem real even after all these years. And to have such nice things said that you took the time to do it, I just want you to know it's very meaningful to me. And I hope this podcast is meaningful to you too. We're trying to create a safe, inclusive, fun environment that has good information and humility and humor, and we're really glad you can be a part of it. If you are a listener of the podcast, you know that the title of the song always includes a musical reference. And we put all that music on Spotify playlists. We're now on Spotify playlist Sleep Unplugged Volume 3, where all the music for the show that season is put into a playlist. So if you have Spotify, look up Sleep Unplugged Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. You can find Al Green's Let's Stay Together. This is a tremendous song, blockbuster song, one of the biggest songs of 1972. It was the number 11 song in 1972 that year, barely edging out Looking Glass's Brandy, which was number 12. And, Rolling Stone is named as one of the best songs all time. Al Green was really considered one of the last of the great soul singers. And I love the story that Al Green got kicked out of his house by his father for listening to Jackie Wilson, who we featured in episode 80 of the podcast. And, initially in Al Green's career was imitating all these various singers, including Jackie Wilson, even Elvis, until he really found his own voice. And Let's Stay Together is just an amazing song. And it's always fun. I'm a huge David Bowie fan. If you know, listening to the show, you can see the little David Bowie reference in the icon of the podcast. How do we relate Al Green's Let's Stay Together to David Bowie? It was interesting in 1984 when Tina Turner released Private Dancer, which was her breakthrough solo album after years of struggling as a solo artist when she left Ike Turner. she released Private Dancer, which is actually written by Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits, who we featured in an earlier episode, but he thought this should be sung by a woman. So Tina Turner recorded it. But she had two cover songs on Private Dancer. One was Al Green's Let's Stay Together, that went right into 1984 by David Bowie. And I remember thinking that was such a strange cover song. She actually sang backup on David Bowie's single Tonight, which was released in 84, and her album was released in 84. So she covered 1984. Whoa, if you're watching the video on YouTube, kind of missed the rail there on my chair. So she covered it in 1984, and they were really good buddies. 1984 off of Diamond Dogs. That was his Orwellian. He wanted to make the book 1984 into like a musical, but never was able to secure the rights. So he turned all the music he'd been working on into Diamond Dogs. So Al Green going onto the Spotify playlist, and we are headed into the meat and potatoes of this episode, which really started when I recently read a CVS article that my nurse practitioner, the nurse practitioner who works in my clinic, Ellen Wormter, was featured in, and it was about the Scandinavian sleep method. And in this episode or this article, they were talking about in Europe that when you sleep in a bed with your partner, both of you have your own sort of bedding or your at least your own duvet. In fact, when I was the last time I was in New York, I was at the Equinox Hotel, which is amazing. If you want an incredible place to stay and eat and work out and be in a room that completely supports your health, you should absolutely check out the Equinox Hotel. It's really quite incredible. And we did a whole episode on uh, sort of the sleep and how that sleep and hospitality. I can't remember what episode that was, but that can certainly be one that you could sort of look up and find out more information about. But anyway, so when you walk into that hotel room, on the bed are neatly folded two duvets on top of the bed, which is really kind of unusual if you think about it. That's not typically what you see. Generally, we see a big duvet, blanket, comforter over the entire bed. It was episode 90 was our sleep and hospitality episode. But when you go into the Equinox Hotel, or if you're in Europe, you see that there's sort of two sets of bedding for you and your partner. So there is none of that sort of tug of war and pulling of the comforter and things of that nature. And as I was reading that article, I recently read another article about sleep divorce, which we talked about a long time ago on the podcast. That was back episode 8, trendy sleep topics. We talked about orthosomnia, revenge, bedtime procrastination, and sleep divorce. And I'll be honest with you, when I first heard the term sleep divorce, I thought, well, this won't last long. I didn't like the term. I've never been a fan of the term. I've never really been a fan of the concept, and I'll explain that in a minute. And I hoped that if I just ignored it, it would go away, but it didn't. What I mean by that is this: I don't think it's a problem at all if two individuals want to sleep apart from one another. There's old research going back that talks about sleep is inherently a solo endeavor. So if two people choose to sleep apart, I think that's fine. But the concept and the theme of sleep divorce often centers around one of the partners having some sort of problem. And instead of dealing with the problem, you just sleep apart, which to me is it's sort of like, well, we have this dog and sometimes he goes out and rolls around and stuff. So we've built a separate house for the dog, and he lives in that house over there, and we live over here. And you're like, well, why do you do that? Well, because he smells terrible. Well, you could just bathe the dog. You could deal with the problem, and now the dog smells good and he can live with you again. or you could go full North Dakota and just shoot the dog if you wanted to, I guess. But my point being, solve the problem, right? You don't need to sleep in separate bedrooms if there are problems that can be solved. So I thought it would be a fun episode to sort of talk about partner sleeping and ways to sort of solve the problems that tend to pop up. And Wendy Troxel is a sleep specialist extraordinaire. She is the author of a book that I cannot memorize. I always call it Between the Sheets, and or Under the Cover. I always bastardize the name. And it's a wonderful book about partner sleeping. It's called Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep. So look up Wendy's book and take a listen to it. It's great. So to me, and she wrote in something one time, going to sleep and waking up together is one of the most intimate human actions that optimally occurs when one feels sufficiently safe and secure to downregulate vigilance and alertness. That's from Wendy. That's a quotation directly from a paper that she wrote. And I thought that was awesome. So, reading How the Scandinavian Sleep Method Can Help You Sleep Better, according to a sleep expert, Ellen Wormter. You can follow her at Sleep NP on Twitter and I believe Instagram as well too. I thought, well, what are the values that go into couples sleeping together effectively? And when those things are not aligned, how can we fix them? And one of the first concepts that I came across was chronotype. And we've talked about chronotype before. Chronotype has to do with circadian rhythms, which we talked about in episode 14. It's really looking at, are you sort of a night person? Are you more of a morning person? And understanding that chronotype can absolutely influence not only the timing of your sleep, but according to a lot of sleep research, the way you interact with other sleepers, which I think is really, really cool. So the idea of the night owl and the morning lark coming together as a partnership that can absolutely influence sleep. And there was a 2016 study entitled Two in a Bed, The Influence of Couple Sleeping in Chronotype on Relationship and Sleep, an Overview. And I want to read some highlights of this because I thought it was really fascinating. Some marital problems might be associated with nocturnal disruption. So we'll talk about those in a minute. The aspects that conflicts are caused by disturbed sleep or diverging preferences due to mismatched chronotype should be taken into consideration by physicians, therapists, and marriage counselors. And so I thought that was really interesting, this idea that when you sit down with a therapist, when you're, contemplating marriage, what does it mean when one individual likes to stay up late and likes to get up late versus somebody who might like to get up early and go to bed early? And I don't feel it so much with my partner, but man, I really feel it sometimes when I'm with my kids because as I've gotten older, I was definitely a night owl when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate the mornings and appreciate them or not, I've got a clinic of patients to see. So the idea that, sometimes when my kids come, they're on vacation, they finish their midterms, their finals, and they're in vacation mode. And it's really disruptive to some extent that you're up, you've had breakfast, you've done a bunch of stuff, and now they're kind of getting up and looking around for breakfast, and you're ready to kind of start your day. And they're like, hey, you want to maybe go exercise in a couple hours? I'm like, yeah, in a couple hours, it's 2 o'clock. Like I want to get on with some things here. So that mismatch is really meaningful when you're trying to bring people together versus, my daughter maybe comes, she produces this show when she comes to visit, boom, she's up with us. she's kind of much more aligned with our sleep schedule. She's not staying up super late, messing around on her phone or, watching movies or something like that. So that alignment really makes a difference. And there was a study that basically said sleeping in pairs can be a protective factor for the development and maintenance of insomnia. Thus, the didactic nature of sleep should be considered when treating these disorders. So, when we look at individuals who are sleeping together, there is a body of research that actually says this can be protective not only against insomnia, but also for other sort of psychiatric disorders. And so, when we think about treating individuals, we want to know about their sleeping habits. Do you sleep alone? Do you sleep with someone else? Did that recently change? Because it can have a very profound impact, not only on sleep, but also mental health. Now, I said earlier on, I'm not in favor of the sleep divorce. And again, I'm not in favor of it when two individuals would like to sleep together, but they're not able to solve some sort of obstacle. Having said that, I think this is a very profound statement from the 2016 Two in a Bed study, which says sleeping apart is not necessarily an indicator of an unhappy or unhealthy relationship and may be taken into consideration. At least couples should be encouraged to have an open dialogue about sleeping habits in order to sleep better and to have a happier relationship. The shared goal should be finding a balance between the role of sleeper and that of partner. And that comes from Wendy Troxel as well, too. So I think chronotype is extremely important. And sometimes when you're looking at shift work, I work nights at the hospital, he works days at the elementary school. To some degree, it's unavoidable. But I've seen in my own clinic a lot of conflict arise when one partner wants to stay up late, the other wants to go to bed early. And I think compromise in those situations is always a positive thing, or at least is frequently a positive thing, especially when two individuals, one wants to stay up late, the other wants to go to bed a little bit earlier. The one staying up late is sacrificing sleep. Because I think from a productivity, health, and relationship perspective, sleep deprivation is never particularly helpful. Another study that came about when I was looking at different factors that influence couple sleep, one factor was movement, the way once we've fallen asleep, how our movements and arousals tend to affect one another. And there was a 1994 study entitled The Influence of Bed Partners on Movement During Sleep. And so they looked at subjects in the age range of about 23 to 67, and they monitored them for a period of, about a week. And they wanted to assess the concordance of body movements and whether that related to age, gender, relationship, etc. So when they're actually looking at movements during the night, men seem to have a greater number of discrete movements versus women. And I'm sure when my wife listens to this podcast, she's going to say, hell yes. Because she says, she'll say often, Chris, you moved a lot last night, especially if you had coffee late or had an alcoholic beverage, which I don't drink a lot. And there was a great New York Times article recently entitled The Real Health Benefits of, or Health Risk / Benefits of Alcohol or something like that. It's a fascinating listen if you want a good podcast to listen to. Check out The Daily because they did a whole article about, or a whole daily episode about that. Overall, 5 to 6% of all 30-second sleep epochs contained some kind of movement in these groups. So when you're looking through the entire night of sleep and dividing it 30 seconds, and then the next 30 seconds, and the next 30 seconds, and the next 30 seconds, about 5 to 6% of those 30-second periods contain some degree of movement. So movement is fairly common. And what was really interesting to me was that movements seem to be much more concordant in young couples than they did older, meaning, you first get together, the young couples, when one moves, the other is moving. When one's still, the other's still. They're like almost in sync with each other when it comes to their sleep periods and their movements. And as they get older, the concordance of those movements starts to break down. So I'm moving around when my partner is in a deeper state of sleep, and she's kicking around when I'm in a deeper state of sleep. So we tend to interrupt each other more as we get older. And I thought it was really interesting too that female bed partners reported being disturbed more by their partner's movements than male partners. And then subjects sleeping with a partner showed a greater number of discrete movements than matched subjects who slept alone. And to some extent, couples seem pretty much unaware of the similarities or the lack of concordance to their movement, although they'll complain you moved a lot during the night, you didn't. So it's interesting to me that an older couple saying, wow, Chris, as you've gotten older, you move a lot more during the night, maybe, or maybe used to move with me at the beginning of the relationship. And as we've gotten older, those movements have become discordant. So you're sensing them, feeling them more, and finding yourself being more disturbed. So, what do we do about that? I think bigger beds can be extremely helpful. Certainly, sleep divorce is an option, but I think there's so much amazing mattress technology out there that prevents movements from being felt. So imagine you're on the brand new mattress that doesn't really transmit movement, and you and your partner both have your own duvet. I think that could be the solution to that sleep divorce that's happening because of movement. So to me, that's the key. Circadian rhythm disorder, that's communication, right? Can you go to bed a little bit later and I'll go to bed a little bit earlier? We're going to come to some sort of agreement there. But I think when it comes to movement, it's really setting yourself up to make sure that those movements aren't being transmitted and felt by the other partner. Bigger mattress, no movement transfer, get your own duvet. Conflict is another real interesting thing when I think about sleep divorce. And Wendy Troxel, again, she's just all over the place when it comes to this research. Wendy had a really interesting study back in 2015 where she was looking at the conflict between partners. And Wendy makes an excellent point that that conflict, strife, fighting that we have during the day often bleeds into our sleep at night. And she did a great study when she was looking at individuals who had that kind of conflict, strife. It was kind of, I think it was like between, 50 to 80% of that seemed to seep into the sleep at night and affect the way we rested. So if sleep divorce is happening because that is sort of smoldering in the background or in the sort of in the there's an undercurrent of conflict there, before separating out the bedrooms, removing that physical touch and intimacy, which is probably protective in some ways. I think we have to be very careful that if the sleep problems are a manifestation of marital conflict, the conflict has to be dealt with head on. I think that's extremely important. And because I think in that situation, the sleep divorce is taking away something that could probably be protective. Snoring is a big one. That's the next thing that I wanted to mention. And it's an obvious one. He snores so loudly. She is so loud. Sounds like she's a train. They are making sounds that would peel paint off of the wall. That's a very obvious one where people want to get up and go somewhere else. What was really interesting, there was a 2009 study. You can look it up. It was called The Effect of Sleeping Alone on Sleep Quality in Female Bed Partners or Snorers. Now, very limited study. I think there was 23 couples, of which 16 kind of met the criteria to be included in the study. And even then, it was only one night where they had the individuals sleeping with their snoring partners, and then they had the female partner sleep by herself away from the snoring partner. And it was really interesting that sleep quality was decreased and sleep fragmentation increased in females sleeping with male snorers subjectively. But the data from the study did not suggest that objective sleep quality improved substantially in female non-snoring partners when they slept alone for a night. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Now, again, it's one night, and then they removed a lot of the women from the study because they were snoring too. But the idea that you sleeping apart from your snoring husband is helping you sleep better is probably not entirely true, or at least it's not settled science. So I have always recommended for patients, hey, look, your partner snores, they stop breathing, you've got to get them to come see me or some other sleep expert, sleep clinician, sleep provider, and let's get that snoring and possible sleep apnea taken care of. And we've talked about snoring. Snoring is its own sleep and health risk factor. We've talked about mild sleep apnea, and that was episode 5, but we actually did an episode on snoring. And even if you're separating it out, and that was episode 29, if you're separating snoring out from sleep apnea, it still poses a health risk. So you're not doing your partner a favor by letting them continue to snore and struggle to breathe and suffocate in the room by themselves, and you're going into the guest bedroom, but you're probably not sleeping better yourself. Of course, you're not in the bed with the person that you love. You're not in your own bed. You're in that weird guest bed that you've had that mattress forever and you don't really know where it came from. So stay in your own bed, get help for yourself, get help for your partner if they snore, because there's lots of great options out there. The last thing I was going to talk about was light. Excuse me. Light in the sense that she likes to stay up and read. I like to go to bed a little bit earlier. We're kind of back to that chronotype thing. There's plenty of little book lights and things like that. We've talked about sleep masks before. I think that's an easy solution. Hey, your partner wants to stay up and read a little bit longer than you want to, or, they're watching television in the bedroom, which is not great, but some people do that. Earplugs and eye masks can be great solutions. Chris, I don't really like something touching my face. We've talked about the Z-Den, like a little tent for your upper body that sets up on your bed, and you have a little window you can open up and say, hey, good night. And it's like the Princess Bride when they open up the little door, open it up like good night, and you can close up your little door and go to sleep in your own tent. So nothing's touching your face. There's plenty of air to breathe, and you've got this little blacked out area for you to sleep in. So I don't think light should be a reason why, somebody's had a sleep divorce. And we've even talked about, putting two twin beds together. If the mattress transmission is still not enough and you need a literal moat going between your beds, you can do that as well too. And speaking of moats, the next episode of House of the Dragon is today, I think, and I think something big. I'm calling it right now. I'm recording this on Sunday. The episode is not launched yet. Here, if you're watching on YouTube, boom, 10 o'clock. I've not seen the episode. I think something big's happening in House of the Dragon tonight. So I'm calling it somebody's dying tonight. So maybe not watch that right before you go to bed. But if you do watch it with the person you love in the same bed together. That's it. Sleep divorce and how to avoid it. Stay together. Al Green, going on the Spotify playlist if you have tips and tricks for avoiding a sleep divorce, or you have divorced yourself and you're going to tell me I am way off base because you are loving your now single sleeping life. Let me know all about it. Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram. Check out our video on YouTube. Find us on Threads and Bluesky. Check out the Spotify Sleep Unplugged playlist. Book Sleep Unplugged, Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep's Broken, How to Fix It, and The Rested Child are available wherever books are sold. And tonight, Sleep well, you two.